So this is what it looks like. So if you're looking for some theory, you're going to be disappointed. However, if you're looking for very practical things, I think it's actually going to be pretty useful. And you got to know something about how harmony works in order to make it work. But I have a feeling if you know the rule of the octave and you can use the charts, then you could really make a lot of sense out of this. And it's just good practice. These are all baselines here. And a little bit further on, there's melodies as well. See, here's a melody. And there's 1,000 of them. So there's like an endless supply of little harmonic exercises to do. Now, some of them are, I think, they're going to be relatively diatonic. But later on, it starts to get, and some people here have filled in some things. Later on, it does start to get a little bit more chromatic and interesting, and I think this is where you're going to start to find really cool stuff. And as far as I understand, after the conversation, the students who would go through this were really expected to commit a lot of these to memory, be able to play them, really be able to call upon them when necessary. Not necessarily, I guess, verbatim, but kind of the gist of them. And, like this one up here. It just looks, I don't know what the harmony sounds like yet on this, but it just looks interesting, A lot of accidentals in there, a lot of cool looking stuff. So, yeah.
I wonder if it would be easier for Artimento students to start with like Durante and Panaroli.
Yeah, I mean, looking like at this one right here, this is not child's play. This is pretty complex, figured bass. And yeah, I agree. I think starting with the standard schema that Yertingen lays out in his book is a great place to start. And I'm gonna try to incorporate a lot more of those kind of things. I've got some ideas about how to make it practical for somebody studying at home. Although I do plan on calling Tobias Cram and seeing if I can interview him for the podcast as well.
I'll put in a good word for you.
Oh, thanks. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I want to know what's his thoughts about teaching yourself this stuff, because, there's a limited supply of teachers and there's an unlimited supply of students who want to learn this, relative to how many a teacher can actually serve. So, but Yertingen's site is pretty good. I posted that as a link underneath the podcast as well. And he's got some basic stuff, although it's not complete yet, on just the basics of the rule of the octave and using some of the partimenti. He's got a good YouTube video where he goes through and realizes a partimenti, I think, in a couple ways, and then he shows how Bach does it. So there's a lot of good stuff out there, but I enjoyed it. It was a good conversation. So
I was wondering, could you give us any highlights or anything from the interview?
Well, it's kind of a general interview. I had to balance between, getting deep into theory versus making it applicable to just people who haven't heard about it before. So let's see, highlights from it. We get into a little bit about his recent stuff. Is he says he's looking more into this Russian tradition and kind of more romantic traditions in the Paris Conservatory. And all that stuff was brought over. So he's been researching, like, Debussy and Ravel would have learned this stuff. Nadia Boulanger won the harmony competition at the Paris Conservatory, which was effectively you get a 45 measure partimenti bass with some little basically you get a full partimenti, and you had to realize it as like a fugue or a big harmonic exercise. So that's what his most recent work is. He is writing another book, and it is about the training that the children would have had at the conservatories in Italy. So it's about how how they would take in an orphan and train them up from a little child to be the greatest composers in the world. So I think that's going to be really interesting. We talked a little bit about constructionist grammar. So he co-authored a paper, which, if you've got some time, it's a really good read. I also linked to that, I believe, on the podcast. And it's more of a theoretical basis for schema in your mind. And it's connected with constructionist linguistic theory. So basically, how the brain interprets language beyond just basic grammar, and it goes against this kind of universal Chomskyan universal grammar. And he says that a lot of language is really paired words and paired phrases that create meaning apart from the meaning of the words themselves. And the example he gives, or one of the examples he gives, is like he kicked the bucket. Nothing in that sentence means that the person died. However, that sentence means the person died. He doesn't. Yeah, all he is implying is the person kicked. In no way means died. Bucket in no way means died, but kick the bucket together means he died. So, and he says that really that's what partimenti is, and these mental schemas that you create in your mind are like little paired meanings that get added to individual melodic or harmonic fragments. And that's why sometimes, maybe a partimenti may seem like it's non-functional harmony-wise, or you may get something that doesn't seem like it would work functionally, but it still sounds okay. And it's because it's grown to have a meaning, and it's grown to have a logic of its own, separate from, kind of what we think about as the logic of music and harmony. So like a good example I can think of is rock harmony, where you got 1, 4, 5. Now, if we are talking logical functional harmony, we'd expect another 1 there. But most rock goes back to 4 and then down to 1. And we hear that and we're like, yeah, makes sense. It's perfectly fine. So we talk about that kind of at length. So yeah, those are some of the highlights. I mean, it's kind of hard to. He explains things, I think, really elegantly, and then obviously we talk about the piece that one of the pieces that Arensky wrote in that little exercise with Rachmaninoff and Glazunov and Taneyev, and I try to cut in audio, like me playing the piano in between as he's explaining it, so you can kind of hear how this stuff goes and gets put together, and how when he explains a rule or something, I try to play it in there. So I think it's a worthwhile podcast for anybody. It'll probably get a lot of people interested in the book and just the subject of partimenti.
Fantastic.
So yeah. Okay, let me go ahead and.
Thanks for doing that.
Yeah. And if anybody has somebody you want me to try to interview for the podcast, you think it may be an interesting person, or it's a book you read that you really enjoyed, then I'm getting a little delay on the video, by the way. So feel free to send me, a link to their book, or if you've got their email address or something, send me that, because I'm always willing to try to give them a call.
Cool.
Hey, real quick, I'm going to open up my screen here so I get a little more light. Laura, I'm going to mute you real quick because I can hear your background noise.
Sorry about that.
Oh, that's fine. And if you just feel free to unmute yourself if you got a question. So does anybody have any questions to start?
We were talking with Laura, I think last time about stuff. I wonder if she got anywhere with her.
Oh, yeah, good question. Sorry, I hope I don't get too much background noise. My door is shut, but
no, that's
there.
Fine. Yeah.
So, I wrote 2 versions of kind of a podcast intro for my sister, and I did it with strings and oboe the first time, and she's like, it sounds too formal, and so I cut out the oboe and I did a French horn, and I thought that might do it, and I kind of had a more melodious kind of intro, and she's like, I don't think I'm loving the strings thing. So I'm like, okay, so what do you want me to do? And so we talked it over for quite a while, and then finally kind of came to this thing, like, she's like, I want it more up-tempo, I think maybe I just want piano. And I'm like, okay, well, what kind of style? And she finally said, why don't you try doing it the same melody you did before and some of these kind of things that I like about the other one and do it with jazz piano.
Hmm.
And so I'm like, okay. So I started looking up stuff about how to write for jazz piano. I've never really done much with that,
Yeah.
although I was in jazz band for 5 years.
Yeah.
And I wrote up about a 2-measure segment that I thought was pretty decent, and she loved it. So
Oh,
I'm
great.
going to go from there now and kind of keep building on that. So.
Oh, no, that'll be interesting to hear. I actually thought about it yesterday. I listened to, now it's not what she wants anymore, but I listened to Dvorak's Ninth Symphony and the Largo movement. This.
Oh, yeah.
That is totally that warm string sound. It's got a solo oboe, or maybe it's English horn. I'm not sure. But if you're looking for that warmth, that's what it'll sound like if a real orchestra is playing that, in that register, the kind of the lower string register. So that's a great piece to look at for that kind of warm fireside chat. But
okay, that's good to know. And actually, that was so helpful, our discussion last week, because I felt like it gave me this really great foundation to kind of explore that area. And so I'm like, hey, I don't care if she loved it, because I've learned a ton through the process. So.
Yeah, and I've been thinking about it more, just the concept of, attaching mood to specific orchestration styles. And I think for the most part, there's usually one or two elements that really dictate the feel. And everything else is kind of, the ornamentation around it. But it's like, if you've got a warm string pad down there, played softly by a big string section, it's going to just feel warm and kind of, peaceful. Whereas if you have brass playing the same chord in the same register, it's going to sound like a very solemn chorale. And everything around it is just kind of additional things, but that I want to identify what are those key elements that really dictate the mood,
Yeah, that's cool.
But to get on,
I might.
Go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna say that I may just link the SoundCloud sound bits so that I can share them. I mean, there's not anything too dramatic. It's 8 bars, 4 bars, and stuff. But
yeah, that
anyway,
sounds like a good idea. If you post that, I believe I can play from my my Chrome or from my browser.
Okay.
And
well, actually, let me just pull it up really quick then.
So, but I was going to say about the jazz piano. If you're looking for a good book to teach you jazz piano voicings, my favorite one, and I've looked at a bunch, is Phil DeGreg. He wrote a book called Jazz Keyboard Harmony. And it's really good because what it does is, everybody kind of starts with, you need to learn your block chords.
Yeah.
This kind of stuff. But then he quickly moves on to a really logical way of learning. And he has you learn shell voicings. So just like 7 and 3, right?
Uh-huh.
And if you play them in the right hand and add a bass line, you can hear...
Oh, yeah.
Right? But then he progresses and he builds off of that. So he'll add a third note to that. So instead of this, it's... Right? That's a very common jazz voicing right there. And you learn chords with that. That kind of stuff. And then he adds more notes. But it's all logical. So then you get to... And that's really, the voicings make such a big difference. If you spent 5 years in a jazz band, you'll probably have a little bit of the feel already. I mean, a lot of it's just comping,
Yeah.
So Phil DeGreg.
That's cool. Tell me that.
I'll post Phil DeGreg, Jazz Keyboard Harmony. Really great book. It's spiral bound, so you can open it up on the keyboard, which is nice.
Yeah, nice.
I'll post Amazon.
Okay, I'm going to try to give you these links. I didn't want to push this just in case. Oops, sorry.
Let's see. I posted the link to the book. Let's see.
Excellent. Okay, I think this is right. Wait, so should I email this to you or should I post it?
If you post it in the chat, or do you have the chat right there? I'll be able to open it.
Oh,
Or you
let's
can
see.
email it, either one. So, and then, Luis, I see your question here. We'll get to your question next about modulation. Okay, let's see if I can.
So there's the string version. And
Okay, this could. Are you able to hear this?
yeah.
Okay. Okay, here we go. Yeah. I think it could really do with some nicer samples. I'm not going to
Yes,
sugarcoat
that
it.
was straight from Finale. Yeah, I haven't tried the other program yet, but I'm planning as soon as I get it worked to where she likes it, I'm going to try that program.
Yeah, and one thing that you want to keep in mind too is, and this is just generally in the film scoring community, if you're going to demo something, you want to demo the best product possible.
Okay.
So, if it's now, this is your sister, right? So,
Yeah.
you're not going to get fired unless it's like
Yeah.
you submit 10 things and she's like, it's just not right. But if you come in strong with a good string sound, it can make a difference whether it's accepted or not.
Okay, yeah, that's a good thing to think about.
So, and there's some affordable string libraries out there. Even if you wanted to try out like the East West Composer Cloud, you can. Yeah, I don't know if they have a trial. Let's see, East West Composer Cloud. I tried it out. I've got East West Quantum Leap Symphonic Orchestra, which I bought a number of years ago, and it's okay. I've also got the Cinesamples stuff, which is a lot better. Spitfire. If you want like an all-purpose general library, the Spitfire stuff is really great. Like Albion 1. Now it's a little pricey, a couple £100 basically, but you're going to be able to get a lot done with Albion 1.
Okay.
Cinesamples has Cine Symphony, and the thing with these libraries is that if you are trying to do an intricate arrangement, where you're basically taking a whole orchestra and writing out each individual part, it's not going to work with that. You just don't have enough control with Albion 1 or with the Cine Symphony or the other sketching kind of libraries. But if you're just like getting like, this is my strings, or this is my woodwinds and this is my brass, then you can get a lot done with those libraries, and you can get it done really fast too, and that's the benefit. So
Okay.
so something
Cool.
to think about if you're moving in that direction.
Okay.
But here, let's pull up your jazz tune real quick.
It's only 2 measures. It's real quick.
Oh yeah, I think that'll work. And once again, there's some good piano sounds out there that you can start googling around.
Cool.
Some that's not even like like for instance, you can get the Contact player and the Contact Factory selection library. Let me pull up my screen here real quick. That's free, and you can kind of learn a little bit about Contact, because Contact is the de facto sampler for everybody, and it's a good sampler. I mean, it does a lot. It's got a couple instruments in there that you can use. Not a ton for free in the in the thing, but there are a lot of libraries that you don't need to buy the full Contact for, that you can use with the Contact player. Like Cine Strings or Cine Brass.
So-
I think Cine Winds also.
So I'm a little bit confused with these kind of things. Then do you import it like into your Finale or whatever, and then that's how I don't know. I'm kind of confused at how you use
I'll
that.
pull it up real quick. So how these samplers work is that they're either standalone plugins. Let me close my Sibelius here real quick. So right now I'm opening up Contact, and can you see this as a standalone plugin?
Mm-hmm.
And you can also open it up in a DAW as a VST or an AU plugin if you're on a Mac. And when it's in standalone, you're just playing it like it's a, like a live keyboard thing. There's no sequencing ability. So like for instance here, I'm going to open up Cinestrings. This is just their sustain patch. This is effectively the patch that you would get if you got Cinesymphony Lite, which was like $100-something. And you got to wait here for so it loads up in your RAM the actual samples. It loads just a little bit of the sample, and then the rest of it streams from your hard drive. They do take up quite a bit of space, but once it's loaded up, let's see if it's enough. Can you hear it now?
Yeah.
Okay, here we go.
Yes.
So as I was saying, there's nothing applied to this. There's no additional audio plugins. There's nothing, but it's just a really nice sound.
Yeah.
So that's the standalone, and then actually I'm gonna close this, and I'm gonna open up Digital Performer. Hopefully this doesn't cause everything to crash. Sometimes I've got too much stuff open and try to get too fancy with my audio, and everything crashes. So if that happens and I lose everything, just stay online and I'll get back up.
Is Cinestrings the best string sound you can get?
There's really, at this point, there's no best library. They all have strengths and weaknesses. I think Cinestrings really gets that Hollywood sound really well. There can be
what about more traditional sound?
Probably the most traditional sounding library of all of them is the VSL stuff, so the Vienna Symphonic Library. And they've really focused on trying to get everything sampled. So their library is absolutely massive, but it's also super expensive. So
that's not a Contact?
It's not. They've actually got their own sampler. So if you buy their stuff, you'll use their thing. So you don't have to worry about buying the sampler, along with it.
I would just look up VSL. Is that?
Yeah, VSL or Vienna Symphonic Library is what that stands for. So the other one, and I'll try to pull up a couple here, is East West. They have their Play engine, is what it's called. Now, Play is not a sampler; it's a sample player, which kind of gets a lot of people frustrated because you don't have any ability to manipulate or change things here under the hood. So this, real quick, this is East West Quantum Leap Symphonic Orchestra, right? This came out almost, I guess, a decade ago. It's pretty old, but you can hear what this sounds like, and let me see if I've got. Okay, so that's the sound of, I think that's actually 4 violins, so it's like Divisi string in East-West. Were you able to hear that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, the thing with East-West Quantum Leap stuff, or the older stuff, is that a lot of it is not, it doesn't have direct, or, what is it? It doesn't crossfade, basically, with the mod wheels. So you've got this, on a lot of MIDI keyboards, you'll have this little wheel on the left-hand side, and it allows you to change the how loud it is, basically piano to forte, or pianissimo to double forte, and the older stuff doesn't allow that. So if I don't pick a patch that says DXF, you're not going to have that. All the new libraries do that, and that's why this East West Quantum Leap Symphonic Orchestra is kind of out of date, and I don't recommend buying it. However, their newer stuff, like the Hollywood stuff, like Hollywood Winds, Hollywood Strings, that all does it. It sounds really great, but it is pretty taxing on your CPU and your RAM. So now if I open up a new one, and this is effectively Digital Performer. This is how I would do this. I create new tracks, and they are assigned to these instruments, and the instruments are loaded up as VST plugins or AU plugins. And either format works on Mac. VST works. AU does not work on Windows. So if you got to go back and forth between the two, or you're on Windows and pick VST. And then here it's the same thing. I can open up, whatever I want. I'll open up Cinebrass here, and the way my template works, I got to do one more thing with the audio. I got to route it to an auxiliary channel. And that gets into, once you start to have large templates and you want to control how the mix sounds, you really want to not just have this stuff go out the MIDI channel and into a master track, but you want to start routing this to auxiliary tracks and eventually to their own audio tracks where you can record what are called stems. And stems are the individual audio or the individual instrument tracks, or a lot of times what you do is summing tracks. So you have all your strings go to the strings track. You have all your brass go to the brass track. And I'll see if I can pull up my template here in a minute so you can see what it looks like. So let me add an aux track. Let's see. Okay, so you hear that? I'm swelling with the mod wheel, and you can't really see what my hand's doing, but all I'm doing is I'm rolling up and down with the wheel. And this is a trumpet legato ensemble patch, so you can do. Right? So you have a lot of control over the feel of it. Now, a lot of times, it's not going to be perfect when you play it in. You have to go in and manipulate the data. But when you actually open it up in here versus if you're just playing live, I can sit and I can record over what I've already got. So if I do something like this, hear the click. So I made a little mistake there, but this is how I would go in. And is this big enough for you to see?
Yeah.
Okay, so back that up a little bit. If you guys wouldn't mind, if you're just listening, you can hit mute. Thank you. So then, this is effectively what we end up with. Oop, hold on, let me turn off this stuff here. Just like that. And I can start to add additional instruments as well. So if I come in here, I call this trumpet. Let's get low brass. And I'm just going to do a low brass patch. Minimize this thing right here. Let's see. And I apologize, this usually takes a minute to load. The faster your hard drive, the faster the stuff loads as well. So if you have like an SSD or a solid state drive, this stuff usually loads instantaneously. I don't. I've got like, I think a 7200 RPM drive. which is really the minimum that you want. A lot of computers have 5400 RPM, which is going to just be a little frustrating. They come in 10,000 RPM too, but I'm on the wrong instrument here. So, not the greatest piece I've ever written, but it gets the point across. It's and you can see sometimes you just got to get in here. It's a little frustrating for a composer who just wants to write, coming in here having to drag lines around on a screen. But this is how it works nowadays. There's really not that many better options. That's why I like to compose in Sibelius, because you're not worried about these. You're not worried about the performance. This is the performance aspect of things, and this is why it comes after composition for me. But now, if you listen to the whole thing, I've stacked it up. It's all layered. And certainly you could come in here and add a lot to that. That's a very bare kind of orchestration. You could add woodwinds probably as a pad in the middle, maybe some low strings doubling up on this line here. And in fact, it's easy to double things up. So if I just say duplicate track, right? I've got my low brass. I could turn that into a low strongs. And load up a strings patch. It's got to load up as well, but and if you heard notes dropping out, it's because you see this little yellow box. It's not fully loaded. So does that help to get you in the right direction, though?
Yeah, I mean, it's good things to think about. It's definitely going over my head too, and so it's just good to kind of point me in a direction. Yeah.
Yeah, I would say there's a couple of libraries to look at to get you started. I would, in fact, you should just do it today. Go to the Contact Factory selection thing and get the Contact player and get the free factory selection library and play around with it, just to get used to opening up a Contact library and seeing what it's like.
Yeah.
If you're not using a DAW, I think we talked about this last week, Reaper is a great place to start. Reaper is effectively free. I mean, I think they want to, if you want to pay, you can pay. If purchase costs not so much is what they say. If you don't want to pay, the license never runs out. So it's your call. But I mean, for $60 you can get it. That's pretty cheap, and then you're supporting them. GarageBand is obviously a free one, and there's some other free ones out there as well. But Reaper is probably the best of all of the free. And there's the UVI sampler, which comes with a couple free things. There's a bunch of free synths out there, and I would probably look up just some tutorials. Now, obviously, this starts eating up a lot of time. Learning software, this all takes time. Don't pile it all on yourself all at once. Just say, I'm going to learn how to create some tracks and record MIDI data on them, and just use one little free piano I found in the Contact library. And if you can get past that, then you'll start to understand a little bit and build up over time. So yeah. But that the Symphony Lite is a let's see, I can't remember how it's $329, so a little bit pricey, but it comes with brass, woodwinds, and strings, and maybe some percussion. I'm not sure. But this is what you can do with it. If you can hear this. Pretty high quality stuff. Very cinematic sounding. I mean, they're going for that Batman sound, but it is what it is. So,
yeah.
Okay.
And thanks for the question. I don't know, Michael or whoever asked the question. Thanks for giving me the opportunity.
Right on. It was interesting.
So Luis has been posting here. Luis, have you been muted the whole time? I'm sorry.
Yeah. Hello.
Yeah.
Well, interesting conversation. I know a library of native instruments. I don't know if you know it. The latest strings are really good. I sent a link.
Oh yeah, let me see.
To the chat.
Is it the Well, let me pull up my screen again so everybody can see it. Is that too loud?
Hi there, Andrew Kress is here with Audio Bro. We're very excited to introduce you to the Symphony Series String Ensemble Library.
Yeah, it sounds really great. And that's the thing is about if you're going to make the leap into this stuff, Complete. I imagine that's coming with Complete now, right? Complete is like the flagship bundle for native instruments. And Complete, if you're looking to compose for any kind of media, I would say Complete is a really great deal for what you get. I mean, you get a ton of instruments. I use it all the time. Now, I haven't, when I bought it, it was Complete 8, I think, or maybe it was Complete, no, I got Complete 9. They didn't have any of these new symphonic instruments that they're adding now. Let me see if I can find those. Let's see. So I had to also...
You have to go to symphonic instruments.
Cinematic and orchestral. Let's see. I just want to see if it comes with the complete bundle. I'm not sure if they include.
They have the brass, but the rest not.
No, the rest is not in there yet. You may want to wait until Complete 11, I guess. Some of these, like session strings, it's okay. The drums are all great. All the Abbey Road drums, I use them all the time. The basses are really good. The giant piano is really good. I use that on a lot of symposiums. Alicia's Keys is also a really great piano. And a lot of these things are useful tools if you're composing for media. Rise and Hit, Action Strikes. I mean, these are things that are like really easy to do, bread and butter kind of stuff. Once again, you're not going to get, a nuanced Mahler recording out of it, but you're going to be able to do the kind of typical stuff really fast, really easy. I mean, if I pull up Action Strings, I'll show you Action Strings real quick. It's just a fun library.
Like templates already made.
What they did is they recorded phrases instead of individual things. So if I pick like let's see. Right? That's kind of a boring one, but they've got all sorts of... Let's see. They've got melodic ones here. I mean, it sounds like every action movie for the last 10 years, So that's the kind of stuff that you get out of Complete. It's all gonna look, but definitely something to look at. I've met the guys who did the brass Sound Iron guys. They're all really really good sample library creators. And then if you use guitars, Guitar Rig Pro is great, and you can get a lot of mileage out of guitars for film scoring. So, but it's $1,000, so keep that in mind. I mean, it's like if you're going to take this stuff serious and you want to try to get work and you feel like you need to really make the jump into professionalism, it's a It's a good thing to have, but it costs a lot. The Complete Composer Cloud collection, or whatever it's called, from East West, it's a rental. You rent for like $49 a month, and you get access to everything. So it's a good way to learn a little bit about doing these things, but then you don't own it, which can be a little frustrating. If you create a piece with it and then you say, I'm not going to rent this anymore, those pieces, unless you've bounced them to WAV files or MP3 files, are basically useless at that point. So just something to keep in mind. Luis, you had a question about modulation, right?
Yeah, I was wondering because I love your charts, your minor. I was messing around a little bit with it. It's just great, you know. You get great results in a fast way, in a logical way. I was wondering if what do you do if you are in modal, in the Greek modes, you know? You are not actually modulating, right? What I mean, if you change from mode, what does how does it go? How do you do? I mean,
Well, okay, you
how,
got
how
to
what is the
think
way
of
to?
modes more. I think of modes more melodically than I do harmonically. I mean, we're used to just hearing the chords of the Ionian mode. All right.
Yeah.
When you hear chords that are different, right? Those would be triads stacked on top of the Lydian mode, right? The F sharp there. Your brain's going to pick that up and say, well, we're not in C Lydian. We're in G major. So harmonically speaking, all the modes, I mean, unless you're really stressing through a pedal, right? So you're kind of overcoming that tendency to hear it in the Ionian mode. Unless you're stressing it that way, then you're going to hear it as a major scale, or an Ionian scale, right? So if you're trying to think of modulating, it really has more to do with melody. So if I were to go,
Okay.
right, I just effectively modulated to C Lydian from C Ionian, but we stayed in the same harmony. And if you think of it like that, it makes a little bit more sense harmonically. Modulating is the same kind of thing. It's just like, where is your tonic, right? If you want to make something feel like your tonic, you basically have to make that kind of sound eventually. Or you just use other methods for making it feel like tonic, like the pedal tones.
Okay.
You hear a lot of Phrygian sounds. But we're still
like
in the
flamenco.
same. Yeah, it's like flamenco. Phrygian is very common in flamenco music, but it's still, we haven't really modulated in the sense of, modulating to a closely related key and then confirming that with a cadence. I mean, it's still, your ear still works the same way. You're just using a different theoretical system kind of plopped on top of that. And the reason our ears are working like that is because we grew up with the diatonic system, with kind of outskirts of hearing other things like modal music or flamenco music or, whatever other kinds of music you've heard around the world. I'd venture to guess that the vast majority of us, and probably everybody in the academy, grew up mostly hearing diatonic music. So your ear is automatically going to look for that sound, even if your brain is looking for something else.
Mostly our Western born people are, of course, mainly educated with the diatonical music, of course.
Yeah.
But I'm asking that because I'm really fascinated of the way Vaughan Williams goes from one tonal center to the other.
Mm-hmm.
I know he uses a lot, the Greek modes, but
you
would
know,
like to understand it better. You know.
I would say if there's something in particular that you really like, you know, there's no harm in getting the score or trying to transcribe it by ear to learn it that way, because I can, you know, talk all I want. If there's something specific that he's doing that you really like, you know, it's worth it to probably figure that out. But you know, a lot of 20th century composers just kind of ignored the diatonic rules for modulating and just did whatever.
Exactly.
You know, so you can overpower things. I can be in C, right, and then I can just go here. And if I play that,
Yes.
we're in this key now. You know? Now if I do this, I'm just playing. We're in C sharp. I just playing random things, but as long as you stress it, that's where you're at. You know, that becomes the new tonic. And that's kind of the core of direct modulation, is that all this preparation, all these related, you know, common chords or pivot chords and common tones, all that aside, you can always force it. And that's how every pop song works. You know, they get to the end of the chorus and then you hear, and then now you've modulated up a half step for the final chorus, and that's like 90% of pop music right there. And it just works because it just works. You know, there's no questioning it. It works.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Well, I'm very, very, you know, surprised by your charts, and I'm trying to mess it around with it. I'm learning a lot that way. So, but your advice is to write to get a score. Let's say I'm busy now with the piano and violin sonata of Vaughan Williams. I love it. It's mind blowing. I love it. So your advice will be to put it down. You know, to write notes and then to find it, to find the
yeah. So
the chords of.
Let's pull up the screen again here. I'm looking up. Now I guess this is a no. This is non-public domain U.S. But you know what? I think for educational purposes, this is okay. But so we'll open this up here, and if we actually look at the score, now I'm not a great piano player, so don't expect any miracles here. In fact, why don't we see on Williams Violin Sonata.
You can put a YouTube video.
Yeah, that's what I was about to do right now. So now we can look at the score. I'm not seeing a lot of accidentals, so yeah, it's very modal. But then over here, look, there's a bunch of accidentals. My guess is that he's just kind of randomly throwing stuff in. Not random, but I mean, you know, he's built up a sound over time that he likes. And
I really would like to find out the progression.
okay, so that's a perfect example.
I love it.
So before that, we're down here and up. And then he goes to, let's see. Something like that, right? He just, oh, sorry. That's an E flat over an A in the bass. Oh no, sorry, that's a C in the bass. Because he changed to bass clef right there. So he went from A minor, right? He's doing. This is not super extremely complex counterpoint, even though it sounds complex, but it's just basically him treating it modally. He's not treating like there's this big tendency in any of the notes he's playing. He's just going up and down. And then he hits a big old C minor. And then back to A minor, right? So it's kind of that. He's doing away. Luis, I think you're breathing a little too close to the mic. It's kind of like he's doing away with this requirement for things to be smooth in his voice leading, because really, when you get to the 20th century, everything goes out the window. You can do whatever you want. It's how well can you massage the lines to make it sound like it actually makes sense. And that's effectively what he's doing. You hear this kind of stuff all the time in really competent film composers as well. Doing polychords, mixing up things that would otherwise not be related. I mean, C minor is not related to A minor, other than by minor thirds. That's right. That's a cool sound, and okay, I can go up and down minor thirds, and that's going to sound cool. So if I do, and then maybe I went up a minor third.
Yeah.
Then I went to E minor there. I'm just... And then if you want to make it sound tonal again, throw in a 5-1. I'm just playing around, and that's kind of the beauty of this.
Sounds great.
It does sound
this kind of course. I love that.
But one of the quotes from the interview that I did with Robert Yerdingen, which I pulled out of that schema theory and construction grammar thing, was the way is long by theory and short by examples. And that's why I felt like in Music Composition 101 you kind of have to get that solid background of theory, but in 201 it's really all about what is actually happening. What is Beethoven actually doing? What is Vaughan Williams actually doing here? I could have told you, oh, you can always move up and down minor thirds in minor, chords, and it's going to sound appropriate as long as you... I can talk about that all day long, but if you actually come in here and all we looked for a few seconds, and we found it, and we get that sound in our ears, now you've got something really usable. You've got context.
Yeah, exactly.
You've got the piece where it came from. You know why. The sound is kind of unsettling. It's not a proper sound. So now you can connect that with emotion. And if you think about how can I orchestrate this? I mean, you start to open up worlds of possibilities for composing. And having a background in theory helps you to analyze it and put it in context. So I can look at this and say this is non-functional. Right, so I can put it in my non-functional bucket. I can say, what is the root movement? The root movement is, minor third. I can look at it and say this is two minor chords after each other. I can look at it and say this is very modal writing because he's ignoring tendency tones, or at least it appears that he's ignoring tendency tones. So there's a lot of ways to categorize it once you understand the theory. But the theory is like the springboard for helping you analyze music. And sometimes the theory doesn't conform to the music. And that's why they say that the way is short by examples, because you don't want to just start coming up with all these exceptions one after another in your theory. Just don't even, just memorize the thing and store it away and you're good, So, I can tell you all day long that is non-functional, going back to that 4, but everybody's got that locked in their mind because of Louie Louie and all the other 100,000 songs that have been written with that, and you've got it in your mind and you can use it, you can pull on that. And that's really the concept of the schemas and the partimenti, is that you lock away these practical tools these practical examples. If you go through the entire sonata form book, I mean, you'll have a bunch of these things. You've got little progressions you can use to compose your own pieces. You've got modulation schemes. I mean, he goes from F minor, right? And then he modulates in the subordinate theme to A flat major. Then he starts off his development section in A flat. Then he moves to B flat minor, right? Then to C minor. Then back down to B flat minor, A flat, and then eventually he works his way to a big standing on the dominant, and then back to F minor to finish off the piece. And now you've got a very logical modulation scheme. You don't have to guess, where should I go? What do I do? It's like I can go up by step and down by step and end up in the same spot that I started. So
Great, John.
But yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because it's an interesting sound, and now everybody is going to turn around and write something with minor thirds.